Good morning, everybody. I think we're just waiting for a few more people to join and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we will start our webinar for this morning. So welcome to this Hart Square session on the challenges in implementing digital change. Really pleased to be doing this session with my colleague Lisa this morning and looking forward to going through a lot of the content that we've got to share. So just a few points about webinar etiquette for today. This session will be recorded, so you'll be able to pick that up from the Hart Square site afterwards, and obviously please share that with any of your colleagues that aren't able to make it this morning. Equally, if you have any, excuse me, any questions as we go through for myself or for Lisa, please pop those in the Q&A box and we will try and pick those up as we come to the Q&A session at the end of the slot today. And equally, if you have any kind of technical issues or anything else like that, then we have a chat box which you can drop any questions or comments into, and our team working behind the scenes will be able to pick those up for you. So just to give you a little bit of background about Hart Square, we are sector specialists, so we work within the not-for-profit sector. We have done since we first started, and it's something that we are hugely passionate about. We also have the benefit of being independent of any technology, so we don't sell or promote any specific type of technology. We have no interest in trying to promote any type of particular solution. So that means we're independent in the advice that we give and the support that we provide our clients. And we pride ourselves on being a trusted critical friend. So we will try and ensure that everybody is aware of the things that they're doing well and need to continue doing, and the things that maybe need to be addressed and picked up for you to make progress. So a little bit about myself. I'm Chris Gilbert. I'm Head of Technology and Services at Hart Square. I've been with Hart Square for a very, very long time now. I have been a consultant, and in kind of my progression through that, I've delivered a lot of projects of various types, a lot that have touched on significant parts of change management. And I'm really pleased to announce that I've got Lisa, my colleague here, joining us today. So Lisa, if you'd like to also introduce yourself, please.
Yes, good morning all. Yeah, I'm Lisa Wetterson. I'm a Senior Business Change Consultant at Hart Square. I've been with Hart Square for just over 6 years now, but I've been working as a project manager, on times a program manager, but also a business analyst for more than 15 years, coming up to 20 years now, and worked in the NFP sector for the 6 years I've been working with Hart Square, working on membership projects, as well as trade unions and charities as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, we are going to run a quick poll just to sort of find out how the impact of change is kind of connected to the work that you do, and so what we'll do is we'll pop the poll on for all of you now, which you see popping up on your screens, and if you could just make sure that you vote on the question of where do you think your greatest challenges are. So it's a multiple choice for you, and it'd be really interesting to sort of see where you're currently at. You know, you might be at the start of a project, you might be midway through, but certainly seeing how that's reflected in your results. We'll run that for a couple more seconds. And that's great. That's a lot of you pouring over your options and giving some great insights actually, which really help us kind of have a sense of where we can focus our discussions for today. So I'm just going to end the poll there, as I think pretty much everyone has responded now, and I will just share those for everyone to see. So I think probably unsurprisingly, people is come out as the top item there, and strategy not that far behind. Certainly technology, interestingly, is you know, probably one of the less popular of those answers, but definitely process. And I think the thing that we'll talk about as we go through is that actually so many of these are interconnected, and you very rarely can just sort of say it's this one thing. You know, they are supported by and impacted by each other. So I will stop sharing and I will move us on to really kind of setting the scene, I suppose, for what we want to talk about today. So key drivers for change in projects, I think, you know, we would all expect to have some significant aspects that we would want to address through a digital project, a technology project of some kind. And so I suppose rather than going through each of these, what I wanted to do was certainly lean on Lisa's experience and just ask, I suppose, as an opening question, Lisa, what are the things that you tend to see most commonly of these? What would you say are the kind of the kind of most significant ones?
I'd probably say efficiency is probably one of the key drivers. A lot of the organisations we work with, they're using legacy systems, and usually on top of that is legacy processes that haven't been changed, looked at, improved over the years. So there's usually a lot of efficiencies that can be gained within any of the projects that we do. So I'd say that's definitely the big one. Data quality as well, because again, there's normally a tendency in a lot of organizations, data doesn't get the focus and the investment that's required in order to make sure the data quality is kept up to date. So that's normally quite a large area that has to be covered. But efficiency, for me, is where usually the main key drivers, but all of them are definitely relevant for sure. You said
you didn't feel the kind of data got the attention it deserved. And I definitely agree with you on that. And why do you think that is? Is there sort of a common theme there, or is it kind of more individual to each client?
I think it's because data is normally only really focused by a few individuals within the organisation. I think a lot of people doing the job, you know, when they're face to face with your members, with your clients, or your customers, usually, you know, data is normally the last thing on their mind. So it's not normally a focal point for them. It's not until they can't get the reporting, or they don't get the accurate reporting, or there's some concerns around the quality that's coming through, and or they can't pull that data because it doesn't exist in the first place, or it's not quite right. That's when usually there's some concerns. But I just don't think there's much of a focus, because it's normally one or two individuals that would have an interest in the data, and it generally just gets forgotten about quite often.
Do you find as well, I mean, I certainly, my experience, find that through people wanting to have a 360 view, for example, of an individual or a donor, whatever that might be, that actually that so often comes back to the data. I mean, that's where it all starts, but it's almost like the focus is on the outcome of the 360 view, and the data, as you say, is kind of a bit of a secondary thing. And then actually, as the development of that solution takes place, and then the gaps start to appear, then the focus and the kind of, it's almost a light bulb moment. Oh, that's why, you know, the data is so important. Do you tend to see that as well?
Absolutely. I think especially now there's a lot more awareness of, you know, the value of having good data within an organisation, and how it can benefit members, how it can benefit organisations as well. The insights that you can get from good quality data is what's really going to propel a lot of the organisations into kind of achieving their strategies, but also allowing them to do that better. And work with their members or their customers as well. So getting a greater insight and having that 360 view is absolutely essential for most organisations. It's something we definitely encourage when we're talking to our clients.
And for those that are kind of listed here, that you sort of see where projects start with those intentions, or with those kind of those key drivers, but those aren't achieved, do you get a sense of where that often is not achieved? You know, sort of the more common areas where it's, you know, the hope, and then the realization at the end of kind of actually what the outcome of the project's brought. Do you see any of those particularly?
Yes, sometimes you definitely don't see it work very well, and that's usually because resources within the organisation, having the right person to actually drive that. A lot of organisations now like to have their departments as owners for their data. I think that's a really good approach because it just gives a lot more responsibility and ownership to areas to keep their data right. So I think there's a lot more that they do today, and keeping that focus. But I think at times it definitely doesn't work very well because usually you've got key man dependency. That's often when the failings come in, or it's somebody who's working in data but doesn't really understand the processes, which is why it's so important to have the input from the business owners into the data, and it should be working collaboratively for that to work successfully. So when that isn't in place, that's where we normally see it doesn't really has the desired results.
And another thing that made me think of as well, I suppose, probably under the banner of engagement and retention, is the idea of support and member journeys and things like that. That I think it's almost of course it's an expectation and a driver for organisations to kind of engage better and more effectively with the people that they support, but also that often the complexity of trying to model that out and actually define how the journey works and what are the stages involved. From my perspective, I think that's one I've seen most often that just doesn't ever quite get off the ground, because once you start to realise the scale of the questions around that, how do you want something to work? How do you want to define somebody who is moved from one kind of part of their journey to another? The actual work and the decision making around that is vast, and I think that can often then be something that I see having a very, very strong position in the original intentions of the project, and then nearing the end of it, or kind of through the end of that project, and even multiple phases, it's the one that starts to slide down the list of priorities, because people just they realize actually that until you have really good quality data, and until you have just a single view of that particular person, you can't then make decisions, because you realize almost you don't know of a huge amount about them until you get that, and then you can make the decisions about journeys and all those things from there.
Yeah, and I think supporter journeys especially, they change often, and especially with a lot of people, my clients that I've worked with, what is a effective supporter journey right now is going to change in a year's time. So the most important thing when you're implementing projects is when you're looking at your user journeys, try to keep them simple, because it's that fine balance of asking too many questions, and then you're going to get some drop-offs from people following that journey, but at the same time making sure you get the key information. But there should be a lot of analysis done beforehand to understand what data you actually need. But the most important thing, I think, when you're delivering a project, whilst keeping it simple, but allow to make sure that you've got a solution that allows you to build on it in the future as well, and to allow you the flexibility to be able to do that, and whether it's internally or with your supplier. And that's the most important thing, is to make sure that it is scalable to be able to make those changes, because without a doubt there will be some changes in the future. You want to make sure you accommodate that.
Absolutely. Okay, so just moving us on then to I suppose the risk, and we probably touched on a couple of these already. I suppose a similar kind of question for you then, of these risks, which are the ones that you tend to see I suppose recurring and being the most common in the projects that you've worked on?
Really managing the project plus BAU. I think really it's underestimated, the lack of buy-in. I think that you need for people to manage the projects as well. So I think there should be a huge amount of focus around how much time that's going to be required for a project. It's really, really difficult when we're talking to clients to say how much time and effort is going to be required, and it's often an ongoing discussion throughout. There is a lot of underestimation, I think, on client side, because it's very difficult to describe some of those demands that are going to come across, because we don't really know what they are yet. But there are definitely some that we know, and from our experience will accommodate for. So usually when I go into the clients, we always kind of talk about how much time and effort is it going to be. So that's really important to have those discussions, and to make sure you've got estimations of how much time and effort is going to be required, so then you can look to see how it then impacts business as usual. Also, on the flip side to that, we need to look to see what's going on in business as usual. What are those critical kind of events and conferences and that you've got going across the year? Where are your peak times, especially membership renewals, etc., to make sure that then we can accommodate it within a project plan as well, so we can work around that and then make sure that, you know, because at the end of the day, your business needs to run. That is priority, but we need to make sure that the project isn't affected. So with careful planning, that can definitely be achieved successfully.
And I suppose interesting from the poll as well, with people obviously talking a lot about you know, well, attendees talking about people being at that most significant area for them. The point you made about the kind of the engagement, the lack of adoption, and the connection, I suppose, to the project. The kind of sense is, I suppose, with some of these risks is that they are risks that maybe happen a little further down the line or at a particular point. But with the lack of adoption, does that, I mean, almost would you class that as being one of the first risks that you would put on a risk register in the sense of almost you can't start that process of engaging people soon enough, would you say? Or are there particular points in a project where that kind of, you know, escalates or kind of particularly is visible?
Yeah, absolutely. From the get-go, we start talking about the resources on the project and who's going to be involved, because a lot of people are fearful of change. That's natural. We all have that tendency to a certain extent, and we all need to go through that change curve in order to kind of really understand. So everybody wants to know how it benefits them. So, you know, early doors, we'll be talking about who's involved in the project, how it's going to affect them, but more importantly, how it's going to benefit them and their areas, and what are they going to get out of the project. Because otherwise, if you don't keep them on that journey, and there will be ups and downs inevitably, but if we don't keep them on that journey, then the biggest risk is going to be a lack of adoption at the other end. So you could spend a lot of money, time and effort on producing a really great system and solution to benefit and to provide your objectives, but if nobody's going to be using it, that's absolutely definitely a real and a key risk. So we need to make sure that we're talking about that.
No, absolutely, and I think the other side of that I'd see as well is where almost the fatigue of a project. You know, I think almost all of the projects I think that we would certainly be involved in, and replacements of kind of very significant pieces of kind of core technology, they are not quick projects. They're not you know, going to be over and done within a couple of weeks, and there is that feeling of appreciating that the more that you can engage with and try and support people that are going through the change, but also going through the project itself in some way, of being involved as a subject matter expert or somebody that's, you know, very closely involved in within the project team. I think that sense of if you lack that buy-in, and if you lack that real understanding and that connection to the project, then it's going to wear you down quicker, and it's probably going to mean that you are disconnecting faster as well from it being, you know, going through the wobbles that most of these projects inevitably do for lots of different reasons. But I think that's another aspect for me that I certainly feel like it's another driver for making sure that the whole kind of change piece is really focused on, because it pays for itself almost further down the line as you are going through those stages. So yeah, I think it's a kind of fascinating area to kind of get into. And what I wanted us to move on to, I suppose, was just to talk about then the kind of more practical sides of change management and some of the things that we can do. So just I suppose for making sure that we're all on the same page with how we're describing something like change management. So change management, it isn't just a people thing or a process thing. It is a combination of processes, tools, and techniques, but it is focused on the impact that those have and should have positively on people. So what we have are two slides which talk to several areas, predominantly firstly about people, and then on to tools and kind of mechanisms and techniques which are focused around the structure of a project and a framework. And I know, Lisa, you've got a lot of experience in those areas as well. So just moving on to the people side, and I think you know, we've kind of already talked a lot about people and the buy-in aspect, and that seems sort of fairly self-explanatory. But building BAU capacity, what does that really mean in practical terms?
I think building BAU, we mentioned earlier around just making sure that we understand what the BAU kind of constraints are, so we can actually then absorb it within, not absorb, sorry, the BAU within the project, but accommodate it. So we need to plan for it. So, but quite often when we're talking to people who are on the project, they do have day jobs that they need to complete. They do have things that they need to do, and they'll want to protect that. So the project does become secondary, even though they're very much brought into the project. They want that to succeed. So sometimes we can do things like we can talk to them about where their pinch points are, where their peak times are, when they're available. So then we can concentrate with them specifically on preparation that we know that we need to go through with them. So whether they're building their scripts as part of delivery of build, for example, when they're doing their discovery, we can work around that if we know about it in advance. I think also equally, it's us having an understanding of the amount of time and effort that's going to be required, but they have an understanding as well. So they can actually, so we can identify those key points in the project lifestyle, and also, recommend that, there's any kind of backfill that they may need, or if they need to bring in other resources. Usually we talk to a person within a particular area or department, but they may have a team behind them. So it's about bringing them into the project when it's required and getting their expertise and get their support for that lead to be able to do it. But quite often, early doors when we're talking about this, before we're even kind of starting the project, we'd want to say to them, have you got your resources lined up? Do you need to get in backfill? Because that's the reality of it, because some of the BAU does need to be maintained, and they can't do both jobs.
And I know the question that we often get asked is then how much time do I need? How much time does this project need? How do I know when I'm going to be needed? And I think that's there are a few sort of hard and fast ways of just simply saying, okay, it's going to be X number of days a week. For particularly, I think I find for subject matter experts, where they're always involved, but their involvement kind of peaks and troughs at various points and stages. But I think what probably we should all try and do in those projects is to be able to talk a bit more specifically about the times when we would expect there to be more engagement and more time committed, versus those times where there's a sort of a sense of stepping back a little bit and be able to, the BAU starts to kind of come back into focus. Because I think the challenge that I've seen, and I know we've spoken about this in the past, is where you are battling with people's focus, and you're trying to get them engaged and dropping into sessions and discovery workshops or testing, whatever it might be, and their day-to-day work is always going to be a distraction, because it's going to be the real life world that is that they're obviously focused on. Do you think that there are ways that you can try to kind of model the timeline of a project and kind of give indications of where certain increases are likely to be felt by certain groups of people, or is that kind of overly complex?
Yeah. Or there's a couple of things I suppose that we could definitely do. One is provide like a resource matrix. So that would be over the key stages of the project and looking at each individual areas and how much time and effort is probably going to be required from that area, because depending on the scope of the project will determine that as well. But we'll know from our experience where we think there's going to be some areas that's going to be a little bit more complicated. Now, as a project manager, we won't know specifically when we first go in, so we'll have to talk to the leads about that, because some of their areas may be more complex than others, so we'll take that into consideration as well. So I think we can put a resource matrix, which is just estimated amount of time and effort we think that they're going to be required for each of the stages of the project lifestyle cycle. I think the other thing is where the sponsor plays a really key role in this as well. So talk to the sponsor and making sure that those BAU and organisational priorities are very clearly communicated throughout the whole of the organisation, and where the project sits within that organisation priorities as well. Because there are going to be some things that are BAU that absolutely have to take priority regardless of what's going on with the project, and they may be foreseen, we could plan for them, but they may be unforeseen, and therefore we have to plan around them. And that's part of project cycle, and we can definitely manage and work around that. But the sponsor plays a really key part in this, to making sure very clearly communicated those priorities to the members, and then we can make sure that we provide as part of the project, like we'll have a team meeting, which is maybe once every 2 weeks, once a month, depending on the activities going on, but provide a safe space really for those leads to kind of really talk to us about some of the pressures that they've got. It's almost a counselling session on occasion, because you need them to come in and they really need to kind of, this is the problems I've got, these are the issues. And we'll refer them back to their line manager, because it's their line manager who is going to be managing ultimately, but we'll definitely consider that as part of the project and what we can do, because there's quite often, given enough time and for us to view, we can work around that. It really depends on the circumstances, but I think what's most key is to give an indication of how much time and effort in the first place from the project manager, but the sponsor, as I say, is absolutely key in making sure there's clear communication and priorities.
And on that point about roles, and I suppose that kind of leans us over into the area of project resourcing. You know, I absolutely agree. I mean, the sponsor, it isn't just a kind of a figurehead for the project. You know, they are an escalation point, and they're a representative, and they're somebody that can and should get involved when the project is struggling, and maybe people are struggling and they need support. But are there other key roles that you would say are sort of non-negotiables for a core, if we take away what the particular technology is, but what are the kind of the absolutely critical roles that you would need to, you would expect to see in a successful project?
With the sponsor we've mentioned, the project manager absolutely needs to be there, because they need to coordinate, manage, be the font of knowledge for everything. But in addition to that, there needs to be a project lead or a product owner. It means the same thing really, depending on the type of methodology you're working with, but it's really somebody within the organization who is responsible. They would be the first escalation point for a lot of the leads who are working in the project, who would go to them if they can't make any resolutions, or there's some conflicts going on, and they would help kind of resolve initially a lot of those, but also be there to support all the leads as well. But they would be the font of knowledge, and they would know as much as the project manager as well, so just to mitigate any key man dependencies there. But the lead is really, really important, because they're the ones that bring the business knowledge as well. And if they don't know it, they know who to ask, more importantly as well. So they are absolutely key. And I suppose the only other person I would say, well, there's quite a few roles, but the SMEs are just as critical. The leads, so whoever's leading that department, depending on the size of the organisation, absolutely critical. But data, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, data migration, whether it's various people or it's a individual, but making sure that we do have data covered as well. From a technical point of view, make sure that we're getting the data in.
And I think interesting, one thing we haven't mentioned is a dedicated change manager, which obviously, depending on your scale of organization, you may have the luxury of having that role, or you might have the budget to be able to bring somebody in. But I think probably what we see most commonly is that change management is more about a kind of a team sport. It's an understanding of there are things that need to be done, and there are different people in the teams that in your project team that have a role to play in that, but that it's not common, I suppose, for us to see a dedicated person. But what I think we're probably talking to here is more about there being a dedication to the concepts and the benefits of treating the project as a change project, rather than having it as an afterthought. And would you agree with that as a kind of a way of framing it?
And it's a great point, actually, Chris. Completely missed off my key people there. I suppose, like, coming back to your point, you don't typically always have a dedicated change person. It's just purely because of the size of the organizations, really. But usually those roles, the change agents, as we would call them, are normally within the people on the immediate project team. So we would expect them, and we'd talk to them about being the change agents. They're the ones that have got to be the champions for the project. They're the ones that are going to be communicating it effectively to the rest of the organisation and talking about it in a positive manner. But they are absolutely essential for ensuring that the changes that we're delivering as part of these projects are achieved, but also in the right way as well. So but they have to support each other, because, as I say, you mentioned about project fatigue earlier, from supporting each other within the organisation is absolutely key as well. So it's a little family group, but it's important to make sure there's an environment so everybody works well together. But the change element absolutely should be discussed throughout the whole of the project to make sure that we're on track with that and we're supporting each other.
Fantastic, thank you. So then moving into, I suppose, more of the kind of practical elements, you know, and the bits that are probably a little bit more tangible and specific as kind of outputs which support change. Could you just kind of touch on each of these and just explain kind of what role they play, just briefly, and kind of any additional bits of sort of insight that you'd want to throw in there for each of them?
Yeah, well, so the first one is a project initiation document, otherwise known as the PID. This is really important to make sure that this is captured and is signed up at the beginning of a project, especially for an implementation. So specifically kind of outlines the objectives, how you're going to achieve it, the approach that's going to be taken, all the roles and responsibilities, making sure that we have considered the resources, and it really documents everything that we should talk about at the beginning of the project, and it's in a one document. It will change throughout the life cycle of the project, but that's absolutely fine, and you would expect that to happen. But it's really important from a governance point of view. This is a key project control document, and it has to be there to, if anybody's coming into the project or anybody needs to kind of take a view to say, what is it that you're trying to do? This is the document that you would refer to. So it's making sure that we all, including the project manager, stays on track and achieves what we set out to. And the project plan, obviously timing's absolutely critical. If anybody says to you, you don't need a project plan, I would argue that they were wrong. You do need to have a plan. If you don't have any timescales, it's just going to be forever a moving feast. You need to make sure that we have got dependencies outlined. So especially when you're working with third parties, who does what and when and in what order, absolutely key to a successful project. The RAID log, which is risks, actions, issues and decisions, really, really important. Often doesn't get kept up to date, but as a project manager, absolutely, we will keep this up to date and we'll make sure that it's there. It's really important because if you're not tracking all your actions, if you're not tracking your risks and your issues, they can't be managed effectively. Absolutely critical for a successful project. Communications plan to ensure the buy-in for all users internally and externally. When are you going to talk to your staff, making sure that they're being kept aware of progress and updates as and when. It's that fine line of not telling them too much, but not overloading them either, but making sure that they're kept abreast of the progress of the project, and what it means for them, most importantly, but also external stakeholders. The timing is so critical on when you communicate to them on what you're telling them. As soon as you start saying that you're going to be delivering them something, you're committing. So it's making sure that those communications are correct and who you send them out to and when. Obviously, the project board is critical as well. So coming back to the role of the sponsor, which is really important in any project. The board needs is a group of people who support the sponsor in achieving the objectives of the project. It's really important that we have full support of the project board, but also any key decisions are taken to the board and they have complete oversight of progress, especially in changes. And also finally on the status report, so this is a health check. So a good project manager should always be keeping a health check on the project. So we've got a constant update of where we are with the project. We tend to do ours every 2 weeks. So we would provide a report to the sponsor. It doesn't go to everybody, it's just a sponsor and the project lead, potentially product owner. And that just kind of makes sure that there's a check-in every 2 weeks. This is where we're at. This is the key issues we've got. There's no surprises to the sponsor or to the project lead because that's been kept up to date and they're kept informed. So right. All really important.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to, I suppose, come back on that you touched on was the project plan, which I think from something that I think we've seen many times when we've worked with clients that have already either midway through a project themselves or they are you know, they're kind of looking at embarking on one and they're trying to kind of think about how that might sort of line up against their own internal workloads and various kind of peak times in the year, is that feeling that you can't create a project plan until, you know, your technology partner gives you their plan. And I think certainly from my perspective, I would say, well, that's just not true. You know, you should absolutely be able to lay out the core elements of your project plan. You know, when you're expecting it to start, you don't necessarily need to go into, and you won't have all of the dates nailed, but even just to see what the kind of the cadence of that looks like, and how many UAT rounds you might do, and what you need to block out for training, I think sometimes is again part of that buy-in, to be able to say to people that are, I don't know, less convinced by the project or concerned about how viable it is, to be able to share something with them which is a framework. It builds more confidence than simply saying, oh, well, we're just waiting almost for the project to be done to us by a third party, or, you know, we're kind of, we can't possibly share any of that with you because we don't know yet, and we won't start thinking about it until further down the line. What are your thoughts on that? What's your kind of perspective?
Yeah, I would agree. Right from the very start, when you're looking at a business case for any project, you know, we can outline, based on the conversations that we've had with the client, what that timeline or potentially what the estimated timescales in order to deliver what we know can be achieved. So and then we just build on it from then on. So once we've got the requirements done, and we've got a better idea, and we've got that scope locked down, especially when we're going out to tender with the suppliers, and then beyond that, once the proposals are in and the supplier's been selected, again, there's another revision that's been done. So absolutely, we should always know a time scale or an estimated time scale. And I think obviously at Hart Square, I can't talk for everybody else, but we've done this many times, and we know how long things take generally. There may be some curveballs that get thrown in there, but then that's when we'll just then replan. But typically, yeah, the stages will have a good idea of how long they're going to take. So yeah, there's no reason why that can't be provided at a high level. And it's really important, because from the client, they need to understand how long this is going to take, because this is going to have a huge impact on their business as usual, on their organization, and at a cost. So absolutely, the client should expect a roadmap or high level plan at any stage of the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, well, we've got one slide before we go into our Q&A. So this is more of a wrap up, I suppose, around the key sort of elements that we've talked to already. So just in terms of some practical tips on each of these, and we'll have to sort of whiz through them a little, because we do have some items in the Q&A to pick up as well, but in no particular order. I mean, just a few things. Yeah, just that you could say about each of those would be great, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah, so at the very beginning of this, we said one of the key drivers for what I've recognised is definitely efficiency. So reviewing existing processes, don't just automate core processes. That's a really key area, because we need to make sure that's right. And there's there is a tendency that people will know what they know. And we often come across where some people are that fearful of change that we've referred to already. There is that element in there, and they're worried about what that change will mean and whether it will be better. So we have to, really work with the team to kind of coax out where those challenges are, so then we can help them overcome and give them some reassurance about how it's worked better, and reflect on our experiences working with other clients on how that's worked better. And usually, that's really helpful for them to understand. But it is really important to make sure that you're not just, rinse and repeat on what you do today. The suppliers will come on board, listen to what they've got to say as well, would be my advice, because they've done this many times as well. So they'll know things that we don't know, we'll know things that they don't know. So definitely listen. But it's a big leap of faith to go with some of the suggestions, because sometimes I have seen where the clients have been like, that's never going to happen. But absolutely it does. And they've taken a leap of faith, and they've achieved the benefits from it. But again, making sure that we do look to do things new and move forward with processes, for sure, to maximize the value of the project. And I think, all of these are really, really important. I'd say strong project management is a must. I'm not saying that because I'm from Hart Square, but I have definitely worked with clients and been involved in rescue projects where there hasn't been strong project management in place. So some of the elements that we talked about just in the last few slides weren't in place, and it has an impact. I've seen projects where they can be successful and they have worked, but they haven't achieved the maximum benefit because of a lack of project management as well. So although it's, we can get in-house project managers, which if you get a good, strong project manager, that'll work really well. But I would always recommend that try to work with project managers who have got experience, and they can prove an experience of delivering successful projects.
In terms of then I suppose looking at things like a focus on testing, I mean, my feeling about that again is probably related to the point I made around the project planning, and actually making sure that you don't shortchange yourself by underestimating the number of tests that you can do and the areas that you can test in, and trying to either run the risk of trying to test too many things all at the same time, so trying to combine testing data migration with the actual functionality of the system, with integrations and whatever else that might be, but to try and separate them into key sort of sub-strands almost under the banner of testing, but also then to put the time into ensuring that you've thought about how you're going to test, and that you can manage those sessions properly, and invest the time to walk people through a process, because that is all part of them learning the new system and then applying the realities of their day job to that new solution. One of the ones I wanted to ask you about was, and it sounds like a strangely obvious one, but sort of fully understanding the requirements before you start, but can you kind of give a sense of kind of practically what you mean by that?
Yeah, so to be honest, looking at all of these are all so important. But yeah, the requirements starting, again, I've worked with clients where we've been asked to come in and we've helped them understand why their project has gone so wrong, really, and then what we need to do to get them on track. And just recently we've had where there was no requirements, and the requirements that were used, if there were any, were from years ago. So this is why it's not on track. So they were almost delivering a project which actually wasn't going to be delivering any benefit, and it wasn't even the requirements that the teams needed. So it's really important to fully understand what your requirements are. And that process should definitely happen before you go into an implementation of any project. I mean, in order to make sure that you're getting the correct costings, but you don't want to be spending time and effort, nobody does, on something that they're not going to achieve any benefits from. So absolutely, requirements should be locked down, and then they should also be brought back up again with the supplier when they come on board to rediscuss them again, and then just make sure that they are fully understood as well.
And I think the key benefit of having an organizational strategic aim and objective, objectives that allows you then to assess those requirements, so that it's not just a case of, well, I really want that because I really want that. It's actually that there is a push that we're trying to make to increase a certain segment of our supporter base, or provide something better for our members, or be able to kind of enable us to do something differently internally, and analyze our information, whatever it might be. But being able to have, I suppose, less of it being a purely personal argument about, well, I want this, well, I want that, and then where do you go? But I think being able to have that, I suppose, almost take the person out of it in that sense, and have something that you can assess against those requirements to say, well, that really does align with what we're trying to do in the next 5 years, and that isn't quite so strongly aligned, and therefore it's kind of a nice to have, or it might be on the future thing that we will get to, kind of, if we go in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Like you make a good point that requirements gathering is probably a whole nother session, but relating them back to your strategic objectives and making sure that you have clear objectives for the project is an absolute must. And these are really important factors, not only for the project, but also for the people, because they need to understand why we're putting a time, waste, energy, not waste, sorry, a time and energy into a project, and, sweat, blood and tears into this. What are we actually going to achieve? And they need to know how it benefits them. So it's making sure that we get their buy-in. By doing that, it's making sure that we understand what it is that they want, which is why requirements gathering is also so important. because this is part of the journey that you have right from the start, especially key users and your SMEs, making sure that they're brought onto that journey. So when you actually come to implement the project, they're already brought in. And so it makes your job a lot easier because they already know what's going to be delivered. They already understand how it's going to benefit them. So requirements gathering is incredibly important for that aspect as well, making sure that you get buy-in from the people who are going to be delivering the project.
Definitely. Fantastic. All right, well, we will move on to Q&A. We've had quite a few questions dropped in there, and I will I'll have a scan through and I'll just pick a couple out and throw them out there for us. So not an easy one to answer, but how do you get around the conversations of that's not my job on project tasks? So I guess a sense of, well, you know, it needs doing, but I'm not the person that's going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it happens often. So it's usually a sit down with the person who say it's not their job, and also the project lead or the product owner, to understand whose job it actually is. And if we can't determine whose job it is, then it's normally something that's escalated to the sponsor, because it might well be that it's actually a gap. And even if it's the sponsor saying, no, it is your job, that becomes more of a line management issue where they need to make sure people are doing. But I think from my point of view, on a personal level, I try to understand why they think it's not their job. And also because it might be something that they are not experienced in or actually scared to do or they haven't done before. And we get that a lot where people haven't done something before, so they don't think it's their job. And especially like when you're asking them to write scripts. So we'll take them through a process. This is how you do it. I'm going to handhold you through the whole of this process. I'm going to check it for you. It's not going to go beyond me. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to have a session with you and we'll walk through and we'll talk through it together to make sure that it's fully understood. But I will also explain about why we need them to do it and how it will benefit them in the long run as well. So there is an element of, it's not my job, and it might be something very specific, but anything related to the project as well, we try to understand why and be very conscious of the fact that there is a fear element that's in there. It might be a skills and a capacity, because people are being asked to do things that are outside of their job as well. So we're very, very conscious of that. So it comes to really talk to them about it. How can we help you? What support we can provide as well.
It's a really good point. No, well made as well. Yes, some great questions actually. I'm trying to pick my favorites out of the those that have been submitted. I think one of the points that's been made for a smaller organization, of the things that we've talked about, the kind of the controls and the processes and things like that, would you expect that to, you know, all to apply to a much smaller organization, you know, fewer stakeholders and departments, things like that? But what do you kind of almost drawing down that to a smaller scale? Are there ways that you can avoid doing things, or is it just slightly easier to do things or more difficult? What are your kind of sort of experiences of that?
Yeah, there's definitely ways that can be scaled down because it would really be appropriate to the overall potential risk of the project. But some of the documents that we referred to earlier are still essential and should still be in place for sure, because they are controls that any project needs. But obviously they're going to be smaller. They're probably going to need less management, and there'll be less risks potentially there. But potentially could be more risks actually, because it's a small organization. So it works both ways. So the answer is yes, you still need those, because you need to make sure you've got your control and your governance in order to make a project successful. If you take one of those elements away, say like the RAID log, for example, it is time and effort, but I think it's just what detail you put in those documents might be a slightly higher level. But I think it would really depend, because you'd have to have a conversation about what that risk is depending on the organization. But there are definitely ways that we can dumb it down to a certain extent.
Yeah. One of the questions that's also been asked is around the ongoing challenge, I suppose, of data ownership, and the idea that rather than individuals being the kind of the sole, you know, or one person maybe in organization being the person that has to kind of constantly bang on about the importance of good quality data and the need to maintain it and all of those things. You know, how do you go about actually ensuring that that's more of an organization-wide approach? You know, what arguments do you make, or how do you find a way forward to try and get more of that ownership? What do you think?
I find in most scenarios is really explaining the benefits to them and how it's going to help them. That's my starting point on most things, because ultimately, again, why do they want to put the effort? Why are they interested? Why do they want to take ownership when it's not really going to affect them? In the sense of data, absolutely it's going to. So it's just pointing out how it's going to affect them. So especially, you take a membership department, for example, and they're not really interested in the data. If you want to get the right information through and you want to be able to then communicate effectively to your members, and you need to know this information to reduce the amount of calls that are coming through to you, or make sure that we've got that data so we can display it on the portal. So then again, less phone calls are coming into you, and it means that you can get on with other more exciting jobs rather than taking phone calls. So they're the kind of things that I would focus on about how it benefits them and why it's really important. When it comes to data, to be honest, I always try and encourage them to get involved as much as possible and insist to a certain extent, purely because if you've got somebody who is managing the data, is a data lead, they need that input. If they're not providing the input from the business owner, then there is going to be gaps, without a doubt there.
The other thing that I was thinking of as well is that usually the kind of the legacy solutions that we see and often clients are trying to replace, there's very much a sense that you sort of chuck your data into them as an end user, and somebody else produces a report for you. And so in a way, it's somebody else's problem to make sure that the data is right or good or accurate. Whereas I think the move towards more modern solutions and that driver to say to people, we want you to look at your own information, we want you to have a dashboard, we want you to be able to analyze things. The moment then you realize, well, the rubbish that I put in is the rubbish I get out in my report, it does start to then, it's not an overnight thing, but it does start to push people to say, well, hang on, if I don't put in that quality, or I don't insist my team maintains that quality, I'm affected directly. I almost don't have the luxury of pushing that problem onto somebody else. And so I think that's another thing that is an important factor. And so many of the technologies out there are all about providing you with more of your own access to kind of key functions to report, rather than it just being kind of throw the problem over the wall to somebody in your insights team or your data team, or that person that likes report writing. It was just another thought that sprang to mind there.
But I think the dashboards is a really good point, because they have instant access to that data, and it can help them even their decision making in the work that they're going to do for that day as well. And it informs them of where they've got peaks and troughs, and where they've got, a lot of member applications coming in, or these kind of details that need to be completed. A good CRM, depending on what's required, can provide really good information for them to make decisions on the day about what they're going to prioritize in their workload as well. So again, it will benefit them.
Absolutely. Really good question here, which probably could be a webinar in its own right, about, I suppose, looking at the behaviors that are exhibited by SMEs and kind of almost on what to watch out for, because of the experience of maybe SMEs that say all the right things and make themselves sound like they're very much engaged, and actually when it comes to them having to do the job and put the time in and attend something or go through testing, then you get the pushback. Would you, are there ways to kind of keep track of those behaviors? Are there behaviors that you would say are kind of warning signs? Again, it's a vast sort of area to cover, but just what are your sort of initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, it definitely happens. And, what could be an SME that's completely engaged and doing all the right things in the next month could be completely different. I think most importantly, communication, making sure that there is consistent engagement. So coming back to like team meetings, etc., it's really important that there's attendance there. Coming back to the sponsor to make sure that those people understand the importance of that, and putting emphasis on how important it is. If you're doing any meeting in that month, please make sure you turn up to the project team meeting. And you don't want to have a meeting for the sake of meeting, but it's really an opportunity at that time to say, is there any issues, is there any problems? But also, I think as a project manager and a project lead, equally as an important role, and product owner, is to make sure that they do reach out to those SMEs, make sure everything's all right. You never know what's going on in somebody else's life, and there could be reasons, there may not be reasons, But I think it's just having awareness of understanding if there's any other additional pressures that are being put upon that person as well. And you tend to notice if there is a behavioural change. And again, a good project manager, a good project lead, product owner would definitely recognise that and just, softly take an approach to understand why. That's not always possible depending on the reasons, but I think it's definitely clear communication, consistent communication as well, to understand other pressures that are going on or other needs that they've got. It might be that they've just lost interest and actually this is not what they thought it was going to be and they're not interested. Again, open, honest conversations, try and find out what the issues are, and then what support can we provide and what other options are there, because there are always options.
And one thing that I've used in the past as well, kind of a practical thing, is almost like an engagement tracker at both an individual and a team level. Yeah, and I suppose just to try to describe that, what that really is, I mean, that's as simple as having a list of the people underneath a department. You can do an Excel, and you have essentially a kind of a high, medium and low in terms of their engagement. And then as you see certain behaviors, like maybe somebody doesn't turn up to meetings and you think, okay, this isn't a great sign, that when they eventually get to UAT or they get to another part of the project, or even it goes live, where are they going to be as an individual, but also thinking about that as a team. If you have, if your organization's large enough to have multiple people in a team, and you felt like the events team were pretty disengaged with the way that they've interacted and the time that they've provided and the input, whether they're very kind of passive and quiet when they're asked for feedback, you would be able to at least track that and be something that you should be quite relatively open and honest about, maybe without kind of naming and shaming individually, but talking about our project boards as well and saying, well, look, the project is progressing, but there are going to be challenges at some future point because of that concern about the engagement levels from different people. Being able to do that, at least it's less than about people in the project team almost having to carry that with them as this sort of unspoken, unwritten additional pressure that they're kind of having to manage and try and work through. And to your point then, if there's a very kind of consistent and common feeling of an individual or a team disengaging, that then you can focus your efforts in that. You don't want to necessarily spend all of the same time with all of the same teams. If you've got one that's really into the project, sees the benefits, is completely engaged, and there's somebody else, or there are a couple of people in a team where you think they just need an arm around the shoulder, or they need to kind of have something explained differently to try and kind of bump up their sort of engagement score. So there's quite there are practical ways of doing it, to keep sight of it and be able to track it from there. I'm conscious of time, and I can't believe it's whizzed through as quickly as it has done, and we haven't got through all of the questions. There's some great ones still in the Q&A panel that I'm looking at, so we'll try and get to those outside of this. But thank you so much, Lisa, for all of your insights. I hope that's been beneficial for everybody that's attended and stuck with us through the last hour, and hopefully that's proven to be really helpful for you and giving you some practical ideas as to where to go from here and how to weave change into your projects going forward. So thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the day.